Combat Thoughts. I'm Robbie.
I'm Lee.
And I'm Alex.
We're going to take a deeper look at culture and philosophy behind martial arts.
Cool. So as a fun starter, then, who is your GOAT?
Okay. Oh, you're asking me?
I'll go.
I'm asking both.
Go on then, Alex.
I'll go for GSP. I think GSP is my. It's going to be my GOAT purely because of. He's a great martial artist. I think he's a great athlete. He's a great ambassador of the sport, which helps me for my GOAT argument. Not that it has to be an argument for the GOAT. But also, I like the fact that he lost the belt and then gained it again and then stayed champion and retired as champion pretty much. Well, obviously you could
a slightly
say that
controversial win.
Yeah, the Fitch fight. Okay, yeah.
Well,
Was it? No, sorry.
Not argue he lost the Hendricks fight as well.
Yeah, and the Hendricks fight.
That's what I was saying.
But then we could argue that about John Jones as well, and he's in the picture. So
yeah, no, true. Robbie, who's yours?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends. I didn't settle on why I've got a category or what my category of the GOAT would be. Like, everyone's saying Khabib at the moment, but Khabib obviously didn't. He's had a very impressive career and he's had phenomenally easy wins lately. But then everyone's comparing him to John Jones. And a year ago, everyone was talking about Mighty Mouse. No one's talking about him anymore.
Yeah.
The only thing that's changed is he's had one loss to Cejudo, which some people argue that he won anyway.
And he's been dominant in one since.
Surprise.
So, yeah. I think this is my kind of really strong feeling about the GOAT. It's not so much who it is. It's the way we're pushed purely by recency bias. So Khabib has been brilliant, should be talked about in that conversation, but it's so recently biased. So I hate what John Jones did recently by kind of contesting it and saying, no, I'm the GOAT. Kind of give him his minute. Let him enjoy it. Let Khabib enjoy it, because the media is going to jump on it because that's what they do. And then when you move to heavyweight or you beat somebody else at light heavyweight, you become the GOAT again because you are that good. And it's just driven purely by, what have you done for me recently? And I don't like that. We don't have a structured approach to it.
Okay, so I think... Sorry, Robbie. Let me just quickly say this. So I think when it comes to... So maybe sometimes people confuse the pound for pound and GOAT. Because... Yeah. For pound, you could say Khabib is pound for pound the best, because you're talking about, and I think that there was a really good conversation between Dan Hardy, Adam Catterall, and Nick Pete about it, where they actually said, pound for pound, yeah, Khabib's probably the greatest now because, well, he was the active one. Like, he just finished his career or whatever. Let's say that he finished his career, and like at this moment in this, you taking a snapshot of time. He is the greatest. You could say that, pound for pound. But greatest of all time, you're looking at a broader spectrum of time.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with pound for pound is that that's a really different conversation. And that's going to, firstly, vary through time, because obviously it's whoever's active at any one time. Khabib obviously is pushed up there by something that's going to tie into the GOAT conversation, is the fact that he is probably in the most stacked division ever. And those lighter weights, lightweight, featherweight, around those, between those two, you always get the most stacked divisions. I mean, you've got Khabib, Conor, Poirier, Hooker,
Tony Ferguson,
Gaethje. Ludicrous, ludicrously stacked division.
And his last three fights have looked easy.
Barbosa, fucking who else? Yeah, ton of killers.
Yeah, no, you're right. GOAT and pound for pound are different, and yeah, I think you could make a much more convincing argument that Khabib is the pound for pound best. But the thing with recency bias is, again, that kind of depends what you mean by the GOAT and how you're defining it. Because if you're defining it by actual level of skill, it should be the most recent fighter. Because, okay, maybe it's not fair to compare Khabib to John Jones in this. I mean, on a slightly longer scale, more like Floyd Mayweather versus Muhammad Ali. Floyd Mayweather should be more skilled than Ali because, quite frankly, if the sport's not getting better over time, something's going wrong. Right? Like if there's any scientific aspect to it, if there's any way for you to build on what people have done previously, if we're not getting better, something's wrong. So it should be the most recent fighter. However, yeah, John Jones is still active, so maybe that doesn't count for Khabib versus John Jones.
Okay,
but
so here's my thing. Yeah. Here's my thing with John Jones and people saying he's he's beaten the who's and whatever the people like Rampage Jackson, Rashad Evans, Shogun Rua, all these people. And what I unfortunately have to say is, to me, those people were not in their prime when he fought them. Nowhere near their prime. Rashad Evans was on his last legs in his career. Shogun Rua, definitely, he did his pride days, which probably fucked him up for the rest of his life. Rampage Jackson, same thing, pride days and other shit that he's been doing. I don't think he was anywhere near like the right level. Whereas like someone like GSP, he fought people who were really like the up and comers.
I know what you mean, but you've got to look at it at the time of Shogun wasn't Shogun of old, kind of allegedly steroid induced in pride, kind of murking people left, right, and centre. But he did just knock Machida out. He was the champion. Like he was the best in the division at the time. Rampage, Rashad, they got to the top of the division. They were number one contenders. What differentiates GSP for me is he's done it over a kind of generational time period and over multiple weight categories. I think that for me is the biggest kudos to GSP, is he's done it over. He fought Bisping up.
All right, well then you two are leaning towards not a skill-based GOAT, because you're not even talking. No, because you're not. You're talking about the competition they fought, right? Because that's why you're not including Mighty Mouse in this. Because to be frank, the skill level in the flyweight, the skill level in flyweight. Look, this is like they're all fantastic fighters, but we understand that lightweight and bantamweight. Lightweight and featherweight are of a higher level, and the same with like the welterweight division is pretty stacked as well, and the light heavyweight division is no longer quite as stacked as it was, but it was a lot better. But even then, Alex, you're saying that it's not as good as GSP's division at the time. You're talking about. I'm not sure exactly what your category for GOAT is
like
here.
Kind of caliber of competition, I guess, is maybe somewhat of a right word to put it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then, is it about the fact that they were champion for a long time, or do you need that to be the GOAT? Like, what are you saying? Because you're...
I don't even. So, like, I was thinking, when they're talking about GOAT, no one's ever talking about someone like Royce Gracie, for example. And then that's like a completely different, like he lost a lot of fights. He wasn't, sort of the champion and whatever, but this is where the GOAT conversation gets really tricky, because there are so many different perspectives to look at someone who's greatest of all time. And like, in my opinion, you could include someone like Royce in the conversation because of the insane, like, I've heard so many people's stories, like even my own dad, who's not really like a martial artist, but he just loves fighting. Him saying, "I was watching Hoist, and I was like, what the fuck is going on?" And like so many people, like maybe not our generation now, but previous generation, are like were just amazed by what Hoist did.
But then is
And I
that
think
one of the major categories then of what makes somebody a GOAT? Their
So you've got
no,
ability to
I don't think it
transcend the
is.
sport. Because you
I
look
don't
at
think it
boxing,
is.
right? And Muhammad Ali was skillful, great, class, fought some good people as well. But his biggest kind of pulling power is he transcended the sport. He was this kind of cultural icon, and he's a GOAT for a lot of people. But that probably has a big part to play in why people view him that way, because he was kind of bigger than the sport, bigger than these kind of role as an athlete. Is that kind of where the Hoist Gracie pulls into it, where you kind of like, he did so much for the UFC to bring it into existing as an actual sport? Is that a category we should look at and kind of say, okay, John Jones hasn't transcended the sport and has had some kind of black marks next to his name. Skillfully, unbelievable, but kind of, whereas there's other people. Is that something then you should kind of put into if you're making a formula for what makes a GOAT? Is that one of the key components?
I think that's a fair argument. I mean, not just greatest. I mean, because now you're sort of moving away from greatest MMA fighter of all time to greatest martial artist of all time, or
Potentially.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a sort of different argument there. The way
Yeah.
you revolutionize the sport. But that's kind of why it becomes so just so dependent on who you are and what you value. Because
Yeah.
Hoist Gracie didn't have the competition. He was from a long time ago, and that is where the recency bias is completely fair. Because, like, you know, Khabib should learn their techniques, and John Jones should learn his techniques and move on from Hoist Gracie. So skill level lower, competition level lower, because he hadn't made those changes to the sport. But yeah, if you're talking about influence, then arguably yeah. But then there's a lot of people, like people who, you know, back in the day, they weren't doing ground and pound much. They weren't kicking much. They were training in very different ways. I mean,
That's true as well.
So
Khabib.
that's my next one probably, is the kind of innovation to the sport. Like, what mark have they left on the sport, and how have they changed the sport? Because you look at GSP, started off kind of karate striking, then went big into the wrestling. I'll never forget the fight with Josh Koscheck. Like a proper boxer's jab, and like kept him on the end of it. And then you look at John Jones with side kicks, keeping people away at range. Now he's a great defensive fighter. Is there an element again to that where it's like, what have they done to innovate? So it might be the skill level is kind of a bit different because of time, but when you look at contribution to kind of innovation, that's what's driving our opinions of the GOAT. They change it that way.
Yeah, I mean, in that respect, Khabib has a lot more argument to make. Like, he is kind of the guy who made the Dagestani handcuff popular. He is that, you know, he did develop that. Like, between him and Usman, they are ushering in that new era of cage ground and pound, the way you use the wall to deliver damage on, like, when you have taken an opponent down. Those two are doing that. Lee, I think your microphone's bouncing on your shirt quite a lot at the moment. That's all right. Yeah, that was it. You know, they are developing techniques in their own way and having a big effect on the sport. I mean, now you're getting into the argument of, like, how do you quantify those different aspects, and which ones are more important than the others, and how much did each of them do it? I mean, GSP and Khabib have had more of an effect on the skill development of the sport, and John Jones, to be honest, has had less. I mean, how many bits does John Jones do that people have picked up, apart from like the oblique kick?
Yeah, the oblique kick, that was going to be my go-to.
But that,
I don't
though,
know,
fairly
use of elbows maybe, but he hasn't really popularized it. Like, it's not as if people have started copying more of his elbow work.
But I think if you look at what he's offered, modern times as a defensive perspective, his range management and fighting at range is good. But when he was coming up, he was probably the first light heavyweight kind of since Tito Ortiz maybe to kind of just take somebody down and smash their face with elbows. And he kind of took it back from to me in MMA, there was a real big transition point kind of around the end of the GSP era where everybody was a generalist. And we're now seeing the more where the specialists are coming back. We spoke about this before. But for me, John Jones brought back that level of violence and that kind of take somebody down and inflict damage. And he did that a lot better earlier in his career. People wise up, people get better. But I think that's what he brought. He came back to light heavyweight, kind of fucking people up.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know that he... I know he might have popularized he might have transitioned things a lot, but I don't think I don't really know what moves I associate with Jones. Like you say, the takedown and the elbows, but other people have done that, and other people do that. And I'm not saying that John Jones hasn't had an influence on the sport and the way that we perform it. I just don't think it's comparable to GSP and Khabib.
Khabib, yeah.
Was John
Khabib,
Jones the first elite athlete we properly got in the UFC then?
Ooh.
Because MMA in the olden days was kind of came from people who were very skillful, kind of back in the day had a black belt in BJJ, but even in the 90s, early 2000s, people chose, especially in American sports, as their kind of route to a sporting career. Was John Jones the first one we got where he could have been a pro footballer? He probably could have played basketball. I don't know how good his basketball is, but he could have been a traditional sport athlete in the US.
I mean, I don't know. But that kind of is a separate argument. I don't know if being the first athlete in the sport, like true athlete in the sport, is a good reason to be considered the GOAT.
I'm not saying it's the reason to be the GOAT. I'm saying was that his differentiator at the time?
Oh, well, maybe. I'm not sure.
And the fact that he was young, I guess, that's also, I guess, an impressive part.
Yeah.
To his credit, but yeah, I mean, other people that we haven't mentioned are people like Anderson Silva and Conor McGregor. In terms of influence on the sport, not in terms of technique, but in terms of actual effect on the sport. Obviously, Conor is massive, and I can't really argue against the fact that like he didn't fight good competition, because he really did. He did fight the top guys.
And because he's hated, his skill level is woefully undersold. He is technically a great striker.
Yeah, I don't know if it is undersold. I think people decide whether he's good or bad based on how much they like him.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes it's oversold. Quite frequently it's oversold. Because he is often, or was, maybe not now, but back when he was fighting Aldo, he was sort of heralded as possibly the best fighter in the world. Especially when he got 2 belts.
Yeah.
But you are right. In terms of influence, I think it's hard to argue anyone being more influential to bringing people in and, to the casual fan base than McGregor. I don't think there's anyone else, and if that is if that's your classification for GOAT, I think it's fair enough to call Conor McGregor the GOAT. He's got other qualities that make him very high up there, but
if you was ranking him number one in one kind of area, it would be that kind of ability to grow the sport, bring people in. He's by far head and shoulders above anybody else in that regard.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the other thing is there was an interesting point where he was talking about who the GOAT is. I remember seeing this, and people were like, your arguments are stupid, and he ranked himself like second or third.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And it was a weird ranking, actually. I mean, Anderson kind of made sense right up at the top, but it kind of dropped off a little bit after that. But someone pointed out that he is at least consistent, because his argument was about who has reached for like the highest height. Mm-hmm. And it was the fact that he didn't rank anyone who had defended belts consecutively. It wasn't about length of it wasn't about time like Aldo, 10 years, and it wasn't about number of defenses like Jones. Is Jones the most?
Yeah, I think it's.
No, it was Anderson Silva, and then Mighty Mouse beat him.
Ah, yeah, that's it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so he didn't rank Demetrius Johnson up there either, because it wasn't about the number of times. It was more about getting to that peak and moving on. And I kind of understand it because, like Eddie Hall, to move away from MMA for a minute, Eddie Hall kind of made a similar argument. He's like, you get like 90% of the glory for doing it once.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's kind of like, oh, you're the strongest man in the world.
Yeah.
2 times. Cool. Like, you know, doing it once is most of the glory. So that's why McGregor ranks him, you know, assuming he's being genuine, that's why McGregor ranks himself so highly, is because he did get 2 belts simultaneously. And if he can go for a third, which I don't think he has a fucking hope of, but if someone were able to go for a third, then he could be considered the greatest of all time by his metric.
And I think that's the thing. I think you can settle on one metric to be the GOAT. For me, it's a mixture of kind of a lot of things that brings you together. What I think is interesting, though, is Alex said, like, let's talk about kind of other candidates, how heavily skewed we are to the UFC. There's a lot of people out there who rate Fedor up there.
Oh, well, yeah. No, I mean, yes, but plenty of people do rank Fedor up there. But also, it makes sense that we're biased to the UFC. I mean,
like, it's huge. And I'm saying the list is going to be disproportionate UFC because it's the biggest company, the best thing. But if we're doing it kind of not just on performance or like pound for pound list, skill, Fedor did do a lot of good shit in Pride.
And he did change. Well, to be honest, I wasn't really watching it at the time, but from what I hear, he did change up the ground and pound meta massively. So he was quite influential on the. He was quite influential on how the sport performed as well.
Mm-hmm. And he did it with a dad bod.
Yeah.
I think that's the best. As a little aside, I think that's the best build for heavyweight. I mean, Stipe isn't exactly ripped. He's big. He's big.
Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier.
I think a bit of fat is good. I think if people were to fight at their optimum weight, like irrelevant of what weight class they're in, I think everyone would be a little bit fatter, just a little bit.
Mm.
Yeah, probably. But so one thing I wanna mention is the fact that like you're kind of saying that we're biased towards the UFC and the recency bias as well. But I wonder if, you know, we're actually like, because we're getting people like Khabib now, and I wonder if as we go through time, we're going to keep getting new GOATs, like, because the sport is evolving, the level of competition is getting better because more people are involved in the sport.
Well,
all
you
these
have
sorts
to.
of factors.
You have to keep getting new goats because, like, there's always a world record to beat. And whatever factor you have, someone can always do more.
But if you look at boxing, and okay, there's a lot less elements to it, and there's a lot more skill in the kind of elements to boxing with your hands. But the sport's a lot older, and it's not changed terribly over the last kind of 10, 20, 30 years, say. And the argument of Mayweather being the GOAT is longevity, title defenses, undefeated. MMA is still changing a lot. The sport's still changing. We've not got to the point where it's kind of saturated with skills. So tenure then becomes more important. The sport's still changing for us. So I think for the next, I couldn't put a time on it, but say 10, 20 years, MMA is going to change a lot. We're going to see different styles of fighting. There's more ways to fight. There's more ways to win. Grappling, BJJ, kind of wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, and so on. I think MMA forces you to have a more frequent change of GOAT because there's more ways to win. There's more things that change. Whereas boxing, not too much changes over time. And actually, you just then go into the kind of tenure. Have you been defeated? Mayweather isn't exciting. But I've stayed up for loads of his fights, and they're great. He's brilliant at not getting hit, but they're not entertaining. He's not like, oh my God, I can't believe he's doing this. He's the GOAT in boxing because he just doesn't get beat. He's done it for so long. I think we're a long way away from that.
a lot of people would say Mike Tyson is like
But
one of the
that's more for
greatest.
the romanticism of he
Yeah,
murked people.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that's part of it. I mean, dominance is a fair argument for why someone's the GOAT, which is why the Khabib thing is quite convincing because he has
Yeah.
been ridiculously dominant in a very heavy and deep division. Like, it's a very stacked division. Dominance is a fair argument.
I also think that was for me one of the biggest things, especially when you speak to people about them as the GOAT, that ruined Anderson Silva's career in terms of the GOAT, was carrying on a bit long. You see your heroes lose, and see the drop off.
Dan Hardy mentioned it as well. Like, I think that leg injury probably changed him quite a bit.
Yeah, you don't ever come back from that. Not that.
Yeah, like that was a fucking insane injury. So it's hard, and yeah, I mean it's sad to see like his decline. Honestly,
I watched the Uriah Hall fight last week, right? And the first round he was aggressive, and he's not normally aggressive, and he looked okay. But then by the second and third round, when he was kind of getting clipped and was kind of legs were caving, it's hard to picture him as the GOAT and that guy who kind of need the shit out of Chris Lieben and Rich Franklin and was that amazing striker. There's a carrying on a bit too long that you become counterintuitive to what you've done earlier in your career.
Yeah, I mean, that's one point where recency bias is wrong because Khabib would lose eventually.
Yeah.
You know, Khabib would lose. In the end, everyone does. John Jones, he hasn't technically lost, but he has obviously been a bit less impressive.
Gone from here to kind of here.
Right, he's been less impressive. But I don't think that's a fair measure. I think that if you play for long enough, eventually you lose, and eventually your skills do decline, and that's just a natural part of the sport. So why should we penalise those people who continue to compete for longer than others? They should not be taken out of the GOAT argument just because they've had 10 more fights.
But then when do you stop counting them? Because Anderson Silva's career is like coming up, GOAT. When do you stop kind of putting him in that he is the GOAT and he's just got old now and he's just having fights because he wants to make more money? It's kind of hard because his career in its entirety is you've had the GOAT section of it, and you can be like, is it just a case of you go from 2006 to 2000 and whatever, Anderson Silva was the GOAT?
Oh, well, that's where your measure of it comes into play. And, we've had too many categories to do it. Is it how many title defenses he has? Is it how long he does it for? Is it how influential he was on the sport and bringing new fans in? And to be frank, I don't think it fucking matters.
So I know both of you guys have opinions on this quite strongly, so I'm going to throw this grenade and just leave you guys to it. How much do you count transgressions negatively against their GOAT status? And I love Anderson Silva, so do not take this as me shitting on Anderson Silva. But things like steroids.
Well,
Jones is... Because I think John Jones going out and partying before fucking people up is actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, it's impressive, but it doesn't make him more of the GOAT because he can do it.
But where also, do you count like steroids in there? Does that... Khabib, clean as you like, great athlete, won his fight, versus somebody who's been caught taking steroids. Do you count them any less?
It's so hard to call it because then what do we do? Do we discount anyone in Pride? Because in that case, Fedor is right out of the window because, I've had no evidence that he does steroids. Also, he never fought in the UFC. He only fought in Pride where they didn't test for steroids. And quite frankly, if you're a competitive athlete in an area where you're not being tested, if you're not taking steroids, you're a bit of an idiot. Because at that point, everyone's taking them. It's not even cheating at that point, in my honest opinion.
No, it's not.
If they're not gonna, if everyone was in a room and they were like, "Hey guys, we're not going to test any of you," and you go, "Well, I'm just gonna do it anyway." Like, just
it's not even Pride didn't test. If you ever listen to Enson Inoue talk about it, he said they was like, "You're going to fight at middleweight," and he's like, "I'm a welterweight," and they're like, "Steroids." Like, they were that blatant with it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I agree with Robbie. Like, yeah, you have to when you're in those federations, you have to keep up with the rest of with the Joneses. Because yeah, I mean, it's like fucking powerlifting or what other sports you have where, I mean, being a natural athlete doesn't fucking give you anything other than a clap because you're a natural athlete.
I don't think we should kid ourselves. I think you should expect less so nowadays, but a lot of the people you've liked over the past have been on juice, and it doesn't make them any less skilled.
You listen to Joe Rogan and Luke Thomas this week, and Luke Thomas is all but certain that USADA doesn't stop shit. So they probably still are.
I reckon they limit the amount. I don't think they stop it. I'm not even that mad about it. Like, the more I find out about it, the more I'm just like, we wouldn't these people who we like wouldn't be there if they didn't do it. A lot of them.
Yeah.
I do believe that there are plenty of clean athletes, and I think you can be competitive while clean. I do believe that Michael Bisping is clean. Mm-hmm. But personally, I would play by the rules, but also I'm not aiming to make a living out of being at the top of the game. And if again, depends on the level on the status you're talking about. Because if you're talking about your dominance, then if everyone else is taking steroids and you're taking steroids, you're still just as dominant. If you're talking about skill level, steroids may allow you to train a bit more because you'll recover better, but they don't actually affect your skill level.
Yeah.
So,
but then, I mean, if we're talking about this, and then we're going back to the first point that Lee was making here. So, in the UFC, where supposedly, clearly, you're not supposed to be taking steroids, and someone is caught, then that is cheating, because there could be some people who are really adhering to it, and there isn't a clear picture. Like, in Pride, it's kind of a clear picture. Fuck it, everyone's doing steroids. No worries. In the UFC, it's meant to be banned, so there's not so much of a clear picture, in which case you kind of are cheating. You could potentially be cheating.
No, don't get me wrong. It's cheating and is completely against the rules, and if you get caught doing it, you should get kicked out. All I mean is that, okay, I think someone should be punished for breaking the rules, but I'm not going to call them a bad person and badmouth them for doing it.
I don't even know if I would say they're not then GOAT status,
so
because
the point, does it impact GOAT status?
Because the thing is, how do you know if they've been doing it their entire career? It might have been that for that fight that they were doing it, they were having a really tough time with fuck knows recovery, and they needed a boost. And it was like one of the fights that was really important, whatever. I don't know.
In the world of painted supplements as well now, you look at a lot.
There are, and you can't deny that, because things are made in China. I'm joking.
Wow.
I'm joking. I was just saying that.
Let's just move on from that comment.
So we got Alex Trump over here with us.
I kind of know what you're saying, Alex. But
it's the cross-contamination of supplements predominantly coming out.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm not against China. No.
I know what you mean. They produce steroids and kind of creatine in the same factory with no regulation. There's shitloads of cross-contamination.
Yeah.
We're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. That's what you meant.
Yeah.
Okay, my honest opinion, because we are running out of time. Though I've liked this conversation, and I think we've touched on lots of important aspects, and I think it's important to identify what makes someone great, I just quite frankly think that people have spent far too much time lately arguing over who is the greatest of all time. I think people spend a lot of energy on it, and once again, I don't think it fucking matters. All right, look, we know who some of the best are. GSP.
Yeah.
Hoist Gracie, Khabib, John Jones. they're fantastic, and you can add other ones into the mix if you'd like. I'm not going to spend hours of my life worrying over which one of them I rank at the top and which one I don't, because it doesn't fucking matter.
And it's so subjective.
Exactly. I was just going to say the exact same thing. There's so many criteria and metrics you could use beyond skill, beyond kind of what they're doing recently. It's kind of it's an impossible task. You'd have to be some like amazing statistician to be able to weight each one and work it out. It's a fun chat though, and if you've got
it is a fun chat.
If you've got an opinion, it's a good chat to have.
I mean, it's so subjective that I actually think a lot of people would rank Khabib as the GOAT just because he's Muslim. Like,
yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
That I also am in the same camp as you, Robbie. Like, I don't think it really matters. As like, you know, the reason why I like GSP is purely subjective. Mm-hmm. I could go anyway. I could go with Khabib. I could go with John Jones even, or Anderson Silva. It's just, I like GSP.
For me, it's GSP as well. But
for me, I don't know. I like GSP. I think he's fantastic. I think he's one of the best martial artists of all time.
I also like Mickey Mouse. Mighty Mouse.
Mickey Mouse.
You're going a bit off the rails, mate.
Yeah. You've gone to Tenerife and just started drinking, haven't you?
I wish I could, mate.
I think the important point is that it doesn't matter too much, and I think it's just more important to kind of celebrate those athletes that are great, rather than nitpicking about which one is better than the other one.
It's an argument that's never going to be solved anytime soon. But for three friends who started a podcast, it's quite a good chat.
Oh, that's very cutely.
Hearts of love.
Russian hammer. All right, guys.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please consider subscribing to the podcast and checking us out on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram under the name Combat Thoughts. We'll see you next time.